Yeah, generally, I think great anger towards society or towards your close friends and family, um, that always stems from a place of insecurity, right? It's this feeling like you have to dominate everybody else
Mhm.
because how dare they see any weakness in you? To come across as vulnerable means that somebody is going to take advantage of you. So in that sense, even generally, it's very much rooted in fear. And I think even for Okonkwo's character as well, we have this quote, but his whole life was dominated by fear, the fear of failure and of weakness. It was deeper and more intimate than the fear of evil, et cetera, et cetera. Okonkwo's fear was greater than these. It was not external, but lay deep within himself. It was the fear of himself, lest he should be found to resemble his father. So
Mhm.
that alone, we have his family history and how weak a man he thought his father was, coupled with the confines of the society he was living in and what they valued, like you said, strength and even like the hard work to make money really stemmed from
Mhm.
strength, right? Like how much time and effort you were going to put into your yam farming was a
Mhm.
direct like component of how wealthy you were going to be. And for
Mhm.
him to see the way his father was treated, that's shame. And then to feel like, no, like nobody is going to look down on me. They can fear me, they can hate me, but they won't look down on me. And that's why he feels like he has the right to be so wrathful, and why so often the wrath will either serve him well in society in cases like you outlined. But I do think there's a lot of other cases in the novel where even where wrath is valued, he takes it past the line and gets in trouble for it.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And that's a good segue into it's there's definitely some irony in I think what happens next is the misfire, like the accidental
Yes.
killing.
Yeah. Exactly. So this is at a funeral. The same village elder who told Okonkwo not to take part in the killing of his adopted son ends up passing away. And at that village elder's funeral, Okonkwo's gun accidentally explodes and kills that elder's son. And, you know, that is a horrible thing to happen. They quote in the book that this is a female offense because it was
Mhm.
inadvertent versus a male offense, which would be
Like
like intentional.
barking up my tree there. That sounds like something I would say, right, Dan?
That's right. You're always looking out for the female offenses versus the male ones. So in Jeremy's company, I never want to commit a female offense, or else he might, you know, his wrath might be fully directed at me. So
Mhm.
anyway, you know, he's exiled at that point for 7 years to return to his motherland, which is a neighboring nearby village, Mbanta. And so he has to stay there for 7 years before he's allowed to return to his clan. And this is just devastating for Okonkwo and his ego. He was finally so close to like achieving all the political power and respect he wanted, and now he's been banished to go back to the very feminine motherland, right? Away from the land of his
Mhm.
fathers and the fatherland.
Mhm. And he leaves and he doesn't really learn any lessons either. Like he does go and he has some redeeming moments. Like I did as he eventually leaves and there's a big chunk of the book that happens. But as he's leaving, he's like, well, I have to repay my mother's family was good to me. I was like, oh, that's not very Okonkwo-ish. Like he actually does something nice. He's like, I need to have this big feast. I need to get his wife says, oh, two goats is enough. And he's like, no, three. I need to repay these people.
3 goats, or I will beat the shit out of you, woman.
Yeah, that is true. Um, and I guess the nice I don't know if you'd consider them foils, but so now Okonkwo is forced to leave the Umuofia, and he has to leave behind Obierica, which is our Idris Elba or my Idris Elba. Dan's who did you cast as Obierica again?
John David
John
Washington.
John David Washington. And Obierica to me is the most prudent person, or the most prudent main character in this story. And they describe him. He's described as a man who thinks about things. He's not one who's just consumed by his wrath, his anger. And he says at one point, he asks why a man should be so punished for committing a something inadvertently. And honestly, like this is I wasn't thinking about this until right now, but it I don't know the stories too well, but I read yesterday a headline that Alec Baldwin is being charged with manslaughter because that gun went off, and I get he did kill somebody, but like the casting person handed him a gun with a loaded weapon, and he gets charged with manslaughter. Like, I don't know. It's obviously,
It's like the term for it is it inadvertent manslaughter, or
yeah.
there's something else there, but it's the female crime of manslaughter for Alec Baldwin.
Oh yeah, okay. And that, I mean, it is true. I don't know what'll happen, but my guess is you probably won't do like jail time. But it's, I think Obierica has logic there, you know, and saying like this was an accidental thing to exile him for 7 years.
Yeah.
You know, that's a lot. But maybe it's their customs they're very different from what we would be accustomed to.
Yeah, and that's like we can either have that conversation now or later, but the difference between the customs, I thought this book did such a good job of framing that, you know, the colonial customs come in and the colonial people feel like their way is better and they have all these reasons for it. And then you have the people living in Nigeria and their traditional way of life, and they don't understand the white man's customs and so on. But what's so interesting in the book is how they frame kind of like the narrator here, this omniscience isn't saying one is necessarily better than the other in specific cases. It's like a lot of like there are times where both are treated as absurd. I remember a conversation where the people are listening, the tribes people are listening, and they hear like, I thought you only had one God. Now you're saying you also have Jesus. And then they're like, oh, and they explain the Holy Trinity. And they're like, this doesn't really make sense. You just said there was only one God. And then the reverse is true too, where right, they're saying, the white people are saying, hey, look, like there's only one God. These are just like wood relics of these other gods. They're like, we have one main God, but there are all these lesser gods. And they're like, that doesn't make any fucking sense. So it's like both sides just feel like their way is better than the other. But what cannot be taken away, it's like this book isn't necessarily on a fault finding mission, but it's so obvious that like just the impact of the missionaries coming here has like that will break apart this way of life, that it stands no chance. And like there are people even in the tribe who feel like, oh, now we're making more money, like goods that weren't selling before are now selling more. But like the overall effect is like something that was these bonds between community, family, like that all will go away once the missionaries become more powerful.
Yeah, it's so, it just really divides. It almost is like they're coming in. I know, to use the East-West ideology, like the geography of it doesn't really make sense because Europe is not really any more Eastern or Western than Africa, you know, or not much more. But it just feels like the more communal camaraderie that we see in, you know, in like a tribal African society in East Asia, in like Native American tribes, it just picked apart by the Western hyper rational capitalistic mindset.
And yeah, and of course the Christian religion, which comes in, and like a former part of this religion was these customs around your personal ancestors and what's passed down in the family. And then all of a sudden you have a church that is now saying, like, we are your new family. Like, leave your father, leave your mother, leave these pagans, like come spend time with what really matters. And those family bonds, of course, will be fractured because they're not strong enough to oppose that very powerful force.
My Christian schooling in college
that's right, with a real missionary here from Georgetown. He's that's why he loved Power and the Glory so much. Just saw himself in that book.
It's not deep enough to know, but I would love, and I maybe will read more on, because I know people have theorized this. Why is the Christian religion so good at doing this? You know what I mean? Like it can just kind of get its fingers in the cracks of just about any organization. Maybe it's because it's like based on hope. And there's actually a quote somewhere in here about the way that the white man's God is based on his love. Like they love their God. The I forgot, Iguigu, like the tribal God is based on fear. And just at kind of the end of the day, you're going to gravitate towards someone that you love more than someone that you're afraid of. And it's just like there's something so seductive about Christianity that just like you would never think that these people in Woye, my John Boyega, Okonkwo's son, while so we can maybe move on to the second act here. But as while they're living, so Okonkwo moves into his motherland, his like ancestors where his mom lived, and Woye, his son, starts falling into with the missionaries, and he like becomes a passionate Christian, and Okonkwo obviously hates that.